What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and learn about a very troubling question. Is it time for Europe to ditch America? So today, I want to check out this video by TLDR News, which really caught my attention because as an American, this really concerns me a lot. But, I guess I shouldn't be that surprised about this, especially given the current state of affairs and the current relationship between the United States and basically the rest of the world at this point. I mean, is it time for Europe to ditch America? Wow. But I do really think this is something that all Americans should be aware of, really. So let's take a look.
For most of modern history, Europe, or at least Western Europe, and the United States have been best mates. The two are connected by cultural, economic, and military ties, most obviously manifest in NATO.
Yes.
And despite the occasional hiccup, have moved in ideological lockstep for much of the past few decades. However, in the
Yes.
past few years or so,
Yes, it's like not the United States and a lot of other countries don't share that much in common, maybe culturally. I mean, the United States and the UK have a lot of similarities, actually, but I mean, we've always had this very productive, cordial relationship. The United States and Europe. It's been great and good, and the idea that that relationship is being, tarnished right now and really called into question. And I know the rest of the world really has always had a particular view of the United States to begin with, but I think it's always been generally positive, Maybe I'll eat those words. But now, particularly now, 2025, right now, that's all, really with the current news and events happening, being called into question, isn't it? So, I don't know, this is just really kind of sad and, from my point of view, as an American, to hear this.
the transatlantic relationship has come under unprecedented strain, and things only look likely to get more difficult as Trump sets up what looks sure to be an antagonistic second term. So in this video, we're going to look at some of the various points of tension straining this relationship, and whether Europe and America could really fall out for good.
Europe and America could fall out for good. That would be, man. That would be something. That would be so bad, so sad for Americans, I have to say, truly. And I think a lot of Americans don't even really realize the ramifications of what's going on right now. This video we're watching here is a little old. It's a few weeks old. So this video here doesn't even cover what happened recently in the White House with Donald Trump and Zelensky and Ukraine, and this doesn't even know about all that. So just keep that in mind. Times have even changed. Things have gotten worse since this news video even came out here.
So as we see it, there are both short-term, Trump-related pressures on the transatlantic relationship and long-term, more structural pressures that won't go away even if Trump is succeeded by a more traditional Democrat in 2028. Let's start with those short-term Trump-related pressures, though. The first one, and the one that's most in the news at the moment, is Trump's interest in Greenland and his apparent disdain for internationally recognized borders more generally.
This is, as an American, I have to say, I think a lot of Europeans are probably pretty baffled by that whole thing. Like Donald Trump's obsession with getting Greenland and the Gulf of Mexico needs to become the Gulf of America. It's like Americans voted Trump into office for a variety of reasons and topics that were at the peak of American culture, we can say. taking Greenland it is not one of those topics. No American feels passionately about this. I would even go as far as to say most Americans don't support this at all and find it really troll and nonsensical. The whole Greenland thing. It's funny. I've almost forgotten about the Greenland thing that Trump he was really talking about that a lot about a month ago. Times have moved on already. Things have gotten a lot crazier.
For anyone who somehow missed this, earlier in the week, Trump reiterated his intention to buy Greenland from Denmark. And then on Tuesday, he gave a press conference where he refused to rule out using military force to take the territory.
Ridiculous. Outrageous to not. Why? To not just give that assurance? Like, just make it clear you're just saying words. And it's all voluntary. It's like, oh yeah, Greenland, you can join us if you want. Like, okay, I doubt. Something tells me Greenland is perfectly happy the way it is. Although I don't know much about Greenland. But definitely, if someone asks you about military force, make it very clear that is not an option, or we're all going to think the absolute worst. And probably rightfully so.
Arguing that the United States needed Greenland for, quote, economic security and national security reasons. Unsurprisingly, this ruffled some diplomatic feathers in Europe. And on Wednesday morning, France's foreign minister basically said that the EU would defend Greenland if the United States tried to invade.
Yeah, and that would be totally reasonable. What?
But even if Trump doesn't invade Greenland, his apparent disdain for internationally recognized borders, as evidenced by his other comments on Canada and Panama,
yes,
as well as reoccurring reports that he's planning to invade northern Mexico without the Mexican government's approval.
I hadn't even heard about that one, invading northern Mexico. But it's hard to keep up with everything every little thing Trump says. It's hard to keep up with it all. It kind of drive you a little crazy if you try. Yeah, our relationship with Canada and Mexico is like totally up in the air at this point because of the tariffs we've imposed on Canada and Mexico. Those have gone into effect. As of today, they've been like kind of rolled back a little bit for a month. And and then we're threatening tariffs against the EU and China and all this. Yep, it just goes on and on.
Will strain the transatlantic relationship. European politicians and governments are generally a bit more concerned about international law than their American counterparts, and especially their Republican counterparts. This isn't us Brits taking a jab at the US, by the way. It's just true that the US is more in the habit of breaking international law or going against the international consensus than Europe, as evidenced by the plethora of UN treaties that the US has refused to sign or ratify.
Wow. Yeah, this is the kind of thing I think more Americans need to learn about. Because I didn't even know about all these treaties and documents and that we've refused to sign all the way back to 1930.
As such, Europe will be especially keen to protect international norms, particularly when it comes to states' territorial integrity, because they've spent the past few years accusing Russia of breaking international law by violating Ukraine's internationally recognized borders.
Yes.
If they stand by while Trump either threatens to or actually does violate territorial integrity of smaller states like Canada, Panama, and Mexico, it will undermine their argument against Russia, and they'll be seen as hypocrites by the international community. The second...
Yeah, I mean, just branching off of that, so the controversy around Trump and Ukraine and Russia has just gone through the roof as of a few days ago, where Zelensky was literally kicked out of the White House for trying to talk about like increasing security in the Ukraine. Of course, that's what he like, as if that's unreasonable to do. And he's literally kicked out, and there's lots of criticism of Trump's very neutral to borderline friendly talking about Russia, and in the most bizarre turn of events, being extremely critical of Ukraine, while not, exerting that same criticism on Russia for the one who started the literal war, who literally invaded Ukraine. Make it make sense. It doesn't make sense.
Trump-related pressure on the transatlantic relationship is Elon Musk. Musk is a close ally of Trump's and has emerged as a vocal supporter of right-wing, anti-establishment politicians across Europe, including Tommy Robinson in the UK, Giorgia Meloni in Italy, and the AfD in Germany.
Yeah, Elon Musk, super controversial figure in the US now and around the world, of course, basically has a government position. Almost feels like he's vice president, even though he was never elected into office at all. Has a, very strange that he has so much power and influence. And he's not part of the government. He's just a really rich dude who makes electric cars. That's what it used to be. Now it's like, who knows? And yeah, he has such a huge influence and feels like he can give his opinion on so many different countries and governments around the world, and like his opinion is fact, and everyone can like give their opinion, fine, but his opinion, due to the position he's gotten himself into, it's really consequential what he says, and it's got a far reach. Everyone hears it. So the fact that someone like Elon Musk suddenly has so much power in the American government is, yeah, that's troubling, I would say. That's not something most people, I think, are comfortable with. I'm not sure how it quite got to this point.
Unsurprisingly, this hasn't endeared him to the more established figures in Europe, who are also worried about Musk's influence on European political discourse via X,
Yes.
which Musk has started using to amplify certain issues,
Yes.
sometimes via disinformation. If European politicians do decide to take action against Musk, which seems increasingly likely at this point, it will doubtless cause some friction with the Trump administration, given that Trump has basically endorsed Musk's meddling. The third and final Trump-related pressure is Ukraine. Now, we've done a whole video on Trump's plan for Ukraine before, but the TLDR is that while there is some ambiguity here, Trump has signaled his intention to wind down American support for Ukraine, which has provoked some anxiety in Europe, where there's a pretty broad pro-Ukraine consensus at the moment.
Yes. And I'd say the United States is kind of split on support for Ukraine. It's definitely winding down, as they said, and I don't know. It's always been strange because for us Americans, we geographically we are so far away, or we feel so far away and so disconnected from Europe and Ukraine and Russia. Even though that's an ignorant viewpoint to have, that it's tough for a lot of Americans to, I guess, empathize is the word I'm looking for, to really put ourselves in the position of Ukraine, because we are not personally the ones being like waged war against, with all of our citizens going to war, being killed. So a lot of Americans feel like it doesn't affect us, and I think that's an explanation for the difference in sentiments between Europeans and Americans, I think. But don't get me wrong, there's a lot of Americans who wholeheartedly have a ton of support for Ukraine and don't like the policy decisions that are going on. So yeah, certainly. As of now, recently, Trump is definitely winding down support for Ukraine. They were supposed to sign that minerals deal, which was supposed to get the United States some kind of return on investment out of Ukraine for the military aid we've been providing. And then they're supposed to sign that deal, and it blew up in the White House. That was a huge story. I'm sure you all know about that, I'm sure. And now, geez, what's happening now? I think, for as far as I heard recently, Trump was completely pulling out support, or a lot of military support, out of Ukraine, and is basically trying to take the role of a mediator by talking to Russia, which also has made a lot of people angry and uncomfortable, I believe. Talking to Russia, not being very critical of Russia, and trying to basically negotiate a Russia-Ukraine peace deal. But Trump definitely wants Ukraine to concede a lot of its territory and basically give up right now where it stands, where the and which would mean Ukraine giving up, I don't know, like is it 20% of the Ukraine like territory that's been taken over? Which I know, I'm sure like everybody is totally not happy about.
Anyway, those are the three big Trump-related pressures on the transatlantic relationship. But a myopic focus on Trump obscures the fact that US-EU relations have been under strain for a while now, thanks to some deeper structural factors. The first of these is China. China is actually a rare point of bipartisan agreement within the United States. Biden broadly continued with Trump's hawkish China policy and actually sounded more bellicose on the question of Taiwan, saying explicitly on multiple occasions that the US would indeed protect Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion, implying a departure from America's long-standing policy of strategic ambiguity.
Man, there's been so much Mexico, Canada, Europe, Ukraine, Russia news. I almost like we've stopped talking about China like in the United States for a bit here.
But while Europe shares some of America's concerns about Chinese trade practices and the CCP's authoritarian tendencies, European countries are generally far less hawkish on Taiwan and nowhere near as worried about the supposed Chinese threat to American hegemony. This was made glaringly apparent when, on his way back from a trip to Beijing, Macron warned that the great risk for Europe is that it gets caught up in crises that are not ours, i.e. Taiwan. This caused quite a kerfuffle in Washington when it happened.
Jeez. I've never felt so close to Trump's face. How did they get this? This is a close-up. Oh my God.
But what was actually most notable about this episode was that basically zero European politicians came out against Macron. The second related tension is around America's newfound penchant for protectionism. Again, this is a bipartisan issue, and it's been motivated by America's anxieties about Chinese dominance in certain supply chains. This is why Biden kept almost all of Trump's tariffs, and actually increased tariffs on certain items that he deemed to be strategically significant, as well as introducing massive subsidies for American manufacturers via the Inflation Reduction Act.
Right.
This hasn't gone down well with Europe, not just because Trump's tariffs and the Inflation Reduction Act directly affect European companies, but also because, more generally, Europe is more anxious about the global turn to protectionism than the US is. Unlike the US, Europe lacks a domestic energy supply, a wealthy consumer base to buy its products, or the fiscal space to afford expensive protectionist measures like the Inflation Reduction Act, which is why they're generally keener on a more open global trade environment.
I see.
The third point of tension is the Middle East. Now, there's always been an uncomfortable transatlantic asymmetry over the Middle East, because America just has more influence in the region. But Europe is also more affected by its negative externalities. I.e., when the region is destabilized, it's Europe that's affected by the subsequent uptick in migration and often terrorism.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at, how Americans feel very disconnected from a lot of these issues. And I think it kind of explains, like, that. And that affects our policy decisions, I think. That a lot of this stuff doesn't feel real enough for Americans and our government. I think that explains a lot of our behaviors, really. Although we care about a lot of this stuff when Israel, Palestine goes to war, Ukraine, Russia goes to war, that's like affecting Europe much more.
The tension has become all the more apparent with Israel, with Europe generally pushing harder for de-escalation than the US has, and being more critical of Israel's violations of international law. And transatlantic tensions over the Middle East look likely to increase in Trump's second term, given that Trump will probably pursue a relatively hardline Iran policy. And last month, the Wall Street Journal even reported that Trump is considering a direct, preemptive strike on Iran's nuclear facilities once he takes office. This is unlikely to go down well in Europe, which has always wanted the US to take a more conciliatory approach to Iran, both because it worries about the geopolitical fallout and because if sanctions were lifted, Iran could be an alternative oil and gas supplier for Europe. All in all, while no one can predict the future, it's at least true that there are both short and long-term points of tension for the transatlantic relationship, which will probably only get worse over the next 4 years, potentially presaging a more permanent split, something that could lead
Okay. And with that, oh my God, what the heck is happening? Who knows? At this point, given all this, for one thing, I was gonna say, who knows what the future holds? Truly, this is a time of uncertainty for Americans, and I am sure Europeans. Um, but also this idea of this whole video, is it time for Europe to ditch America? I think Americans really need to think more carefully about this, that Europeans really are having this sentiment towards America and how this would affect us. And yeah, so I really just wanted to take a look at this video. It was pretty eye-opening, honestly. A lot of stuff going on, and I think it's always good as Americans to expand our horizons and actually get the European point of view and European opinion on this stuff, because we definitely get trapped in our own American way of thinking about stuff, that's for sure. So anyway, geez, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to give this a like or leave a comment with your thoughts on any of this stuff. If you're European especially, this really affects you, feel free to give your thoughts. That'd be awesome to hear about. And if you're interested in more videos like this, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.